Today, I'm talking about 2021 economic predictions. A wise person once said that the only function of economic predictions is to make astrology look respectable. With that in mind, I have 5 economic predictions for 2021. Now, before I get into those, I just want to back up for a minute and kind of talk about the history and how this came to be. So, back at the end of January 2021, we had a client event, a virtual client event for our clients, and we brought in former Chief Economist at US Bancorp, John Mitchell. Now, John's fantastic. To know John is to love John. Boring economic presentations like the ones you see, like I'm thinking Ben Stein-ish on Ferris Bueller. Those are what you typically see for an economic forecast or some type of economic financial presentation. But John is completely different. In fact, he ends every single one of his talks with a poem that summarizes what he talked about. So while he was talking with our clients and doing his thing, I was taking notes. And I came away with 5 key takeaways from what he had talked about that I want to share with you today, and that I talked about at length in the podcast this week. So, this coming week, the theme on the podcast is, you guessed it, 2021 economic predictions. And so today I'm kind of summarizing those for you here in the video. Let's get into it. All right. The number one takeaway that I had for the 2021 economic forecast is inflation. So right now, inflation is really, really low. I think last I checked, it was around 1.6%. Very, very low. The risk right now is actually not inflation, but rather deflation. And one of the things that John said that I thought was pretty interesting was that if and when inflation starts to pick up again, which it probably will, maybe not substantially this year, but even if it increases a little bit, he said that you're likely to see some pretty inflammatory headlines. So if you think about it, if inflation doubles, right, if it goes from 1.6% to 3.2%, we're still at a pretty low inflation rate by historical norms, certainly not hyperinflation or anything to be really concerned about. Now, if inflation increases quickly, very rapidly, yes, that is concerning. But even if you hear or see a headline that says inflation has doubled, well, it's still at 3.2%. So that was one of the things where I was like, that's really interesting. And when I start to hear news stories or see things and inflation does start to pick up, I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind. And I think that would be wise to do for you as well, so you don't get into a panicked frenzy about hyperinflation. It's not Venezuela yet. The number 2 thing that I took away from this, and one of the more important things that I think is that I really want to convey in today's video, and hopefully on my podcast this week, I conveyed this well, is that John Mitchell called this debt that we have right now, he called it a grand experiment. Like, we don't really know what it is like to be this much in debt as a percentage of our GDP. And we don't really have any concrete plans of either reducing that debt or how we're going to just dig ourselves out of this hole. So that to me is really concerning. It's really scary. There's pretty much nobody in power politically who even seems to care about the national debt. But there are some long-term consequences to just printing money and sending checks out to everyone and giving these massive PPP loans to businesses. Now, I will not argue the fact that that was a very important thing to do to kind of keep consumers and businesses afloat. Otherwise, right now, things would be a lot uglier economically. There'd be a lot more like political instability as well. If you have all these people who are out of work, they can't pay their rent, they get evicted, you're living on the street. All of the stimulus helped to make sure that didn't happen. But it is a grand experiment. Our ever-growing debt is a serious problem, and we've never had this much debt before. Our debt has was a big ballooning problem even before COVID, but now after COVID, and as we come out the other side, our debt has absolutely skyrocketed, and that's a real serious problem that I don't know how we're going to work our way out of that without higher interest rates, higher inflation, stagnating economic growth. Like the only way I see out of this long term is that we just have robust economic growth, and that kind of helps to really take care of that problem. But I don't know. It's anyone's guess. Also, I don't want to be too, drum beating that this is a serious problem. Our national debt is probably not a real problem for 2021 and maybe into the next few years, but it certainly is a problem that must be dealt with at some point. We just don't know. We're just making it up as we go. All right. So the next takeaway number 3, is that there is likely to be some future fallout from forbearance and foreclosures. If you know somebody who can't pay their rent right now because they're out of work or can't pay their mortgage, the forbearance has allowed them, especially like mortgages, when you think about even businesses who are paying mortgages on those properties that they're, or even rent, there's a lot of businesses, there's a lot of consumers that are out of work right now, and they're not being kicked to the curb, thankfully, because of this safety net with the forbearance right now. But that safety net is not going to be around forever. And my concern with this is that there are industries that and businesses that are not going to recover. One of the things John talked about in his presentation is that 90 million people went into poverty during COVID, and a lot of those people are not going to be coming right back out right away. There's permanent job losses, permanent deaths to just complete industries altogether. Now, sure, there's new industries that crop up, and it's not like when the car was invented that people couldn't just, the horse and buggy driver, he could go find another job, but it's not easy to just go out and find another job. So yes, new jobs will be created, old jobs will be destroyed, but that is not without some serious consequences. And there's likely to be some future fallout, perhaps in housing market, commercial real estate market, as these forbearance safety nets begin to expire. One of the positive things from this, if I'm sounding like very negative Nancy about this, I don't mean to be, because there are good things and bad things. And one of the good things is in 2020, there were skyrocketing savings rates. So in April, the average savings rate among Americans was 33% of income. So if you were still employed and you didn't lose your job right away, savings rates among Americans skyrocketed. And it stayed really, really high too, right? If you think about it, we didn't really have anywhere to travel to last year. We didn't go out and eat dinner, like a lot of the things except for like groceries, buying toilet paper, and maybe online shopping, even like buying clothes. Who's going to buy clothes when all you have to do is dress the lower half of your body? Like I'm wearing slippers right now. So, and that's how it is for everybody else too. So, the savings rates have remained really, really high. But what's the positive thing and how this translates to 2021 is that Americans are holding a lot of cash. We're like Scrooge McDuck, just sitting on our piles and mountains of cash. And so when uncertainty wanes a little bit, when the economy starts to get back to a more normal situation, people are more comfortable, I think you're likely to see a pickup in spending, which will help GDP and economic growth. I think people will turn to the stock market, housing market. Like it could actually be a short-term little boom situation for stocks, housing, other assets, just because as a society, as Americans, we are sitting on a lot of cash. And lastly, something I did not think about until the words came out of John Mitchell's mouth was he said, quote, this pandemic is likely, or no, excuse me, the pandemic is going to be the lifetime defining event for this collection of global inhabitants. I thought that was really profound, like maybe kind of an obvious thing to say, but when you're in the midst of some sort of catastrophe or grief or really chaotic time, it's hard to sit there and reflect and be like, wow, yeah, this is going to be like the thing of my life that is just like that defining thing. It's usually not until we're kind of removed from that where we really think about it and realized how monumental that particular event was, both personally, but then if you look collectively as a society, and the comparative events that are also considered these lifetime defining events for whole societies. Think of, World War II, Vietnam War, the Great Depression. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of the people who lived through and remember the Great Depression, they're no longer here on Earth. Most of them have gone on to the next life now. So, but Man on the Moon, the fall of the Berlin Wall, 9/11. I was in high school when 9/11 happened, and I'm dating myself. I realize that some of you watching are probably thinking, I am young. Yes, I'm 35 years old, but that was a big, major deal. I was 15 years old when that happened. And it's just crazy to think that though the pandemic, everything else, I think, just pales in comparison to what this pandemic experience has been. It's been so life altering, not just for a subset of people, but for pretty much every single person on this planet who's old enough to remember it. Children, adults, elderly people, like everyone. It's really interesting to think about that. So, all right, that's all I have for today. Hopefully that was beneficial for you, the 5 economic predictions for 2021. If you like this video, please hit that subscribe button below. And if you want to hear more about 2021 economic predictions or just about planning for retirement in general, the podcast and what I cover here on the YouTube channel is aimed at helping you enjoy a meaningful and financially secure retirement. So if you are within 10 years of retirement or you've recently retired, you've crossed to the other side, this channel and my podcast are both for you.